right, I think we'll get started. We've got 46 people here joining us.
Wow.
My name's Leslie Mosley Ryu. I'm from the class of 1987. I'm the director of donor relations. I am the one of the co-hosts tonight. I've got two other people working behind the scenes, Mary DiMaggio and Heather Wexton, and they are going to be assisting us when we get to. Mary's going to be helping us when we get to the Q&A portion. So I'm going to go ahead and mute all of you, and then I'll unmute the presenters as we get to each person in the program. Feel free to use the chat box if you have any questions. And as we go through the presentations tonight, definitely ask questions. We'll collect them. And when we get to the Q&A, we'll roll through them. Okay, without further ado, I'd like to welcome you to Crafting Your Career Transition Strategy. And I want to introduce our panelists. We have Ken Mattsson from the class of 1987, Evie Scoville from the class of 1985, and Warren White from the class of 1992. As I mentioned, we're going to hear from each panelist. We're going to have a trifecta tonight. We'll go one by one, and then we'll have a Q&A portion. We want to do as much as we can in terms of a live Q&A, so feel free to go ahead and drop your questions into the chat box. And after we get through all those questions, we'll open it up for additional questions. So starting off with my fellow classmate from 1987, Ken Mattsson is joining us tonight. And the topic that Ken is going to go over with us is reframing your search and investing in yourself. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Ken.
Thank you. All right, well, thank you all very much for being with us, and a thanks to Evie and to Warren also. We've sort of divvied up what we're going to talk about, so we're each going to talk for a few minutes. To give people a little understanding of where I'm coming from, is I have been in the adult learning and career development area. I've worked at MIT, Emerson College, Babson, Boston University, in career centers and human resources and those places. So as I've said, I've worked with everyone from poets to rocket scientists, and I've literally worked with both poets and rocket scientists. And the area that I'm going to start off with is kind of a broader base as far as thinking about your career, because right now we're in a time of great transition that a lot of people either may have had a layoff or lost their job or decided to quit their job, or they may be in an area where they're not feeling very secure where they are. And so anytime we have these big life transitions, people are a little bit unstable as to, well, where should I be going? And what can happen a lot of times is people will make very quick movements. And it's usually done out of fear and not out of really thoughtful plans. So what I like to say is when I work with clients, and just to be clear, it's like, so I have a private career development consulting business called Resonare Consulting. I'm in Arlington, Massachusetts, but I work everywhere. And I like to say that I work with people in three areas. First is help people first figure out, who are you? In other words, what is it that's really important to you? What is what makes you happy? What makes you motivated? What makes you comfortable in an area? What supports you? Kind of knowing yourselves and your own needs first, most of all. And then the second is, where do you want to be that will be supportive of you? So what industry, what environment, what job, what geography, what corporate culture, what all this. So in other words, knowing who you are first, and then knowing where you want to go. And then the third part is what usually everyone thinks of when they meet with someone like Evie or me or Warren is, okay, the resume, cover letter, networking, job search, skills, all those sort of things. But what I have found is is that a lot of people don't pay enough attention to those first two parts. So I cannot tell you how many people have come into my office and said, I asked them, well, what can we do today that will be helpful? And they said, well, I need my resume worked on. It's like, great. Your resume is a document that's geared towards a particular opportunity, a particular audience. Who is this? So that we know who we're doing. And I would say 9 times out of 10, people say, I don't know. And then it's like, okay, well, let's talk about that first. Because if you don't make your choices, if you don't know yourself what's really important, like what your goals are and who your goals are and where you're going and what your talking points are, it's going to be very, very muddled, and you're not going to make the strongest point moving forward. So you need to really look at what is it that you want. And I can give some examples of some things that have usually tripped some people up. So I would just say, and I'll look for a raise of hands, how many of you have either experienced or know somebody else who has taken a new job, and by 6 weeks, 3 months in, they would rather tear their eyes out than stay in that job any longer? I would, yeah, I'm seeing a few hands. And usually that is because there's something really important to you that you did not check out when you looked at this job. And I would say one of the main things of that is corporate culture. So, what are the ways that you like to work? What are the ways that you like to be in an environment? And to take that into consideration when you are looking at a job. Because if you don't, it's going to come back to bite you later, because that's the thing that will usually get to the, oh my God, I just want to leave this. So what I do with the clients that I work with, whether it's a one-on-one or with individual, I mean, in a group setting, is I really get people to really think about, well, what are the skill sets that you really want to use? Where have you felt successful? Where have you felt appreciated? What are the things that are really important to you? Because you need to know that well, because then you can say, all right, what's the environment that's going to be best for me to grow in, that's going to support me and make me feel good and successful where I'm going, and to match those things. And I'm, I'm just going to give a little anecdote, and then because we've got a lot of, I want to give Evie and Warren also time in this, and we'll have lots of time for questions. But I just want to give a little story back about 20 years ago when the dot-com boom. I had a job I was interviewing for with a company that had doubled in 3 months. They had just really grown and grown and grown. And I just had a bad vibe about it. And this was a first round interview. And at the end of it, they said, do you have any questions? And that's one of the only times in a career development area that there's an absolute answer to that. And that is yes. Whenever someone says, do you have any questions? You always have a question. And so the question I asked was, I said, when things go well here, how do you celebrate them? And when things go wrong here, how do you correct them? And the answer I got was, well, we're working so fast, we just expect that you'll do your job. But if you don't do the job right, then we sit you down and make sure you know exactly what you did wrong so you won't do that again. And in my mind, I was like, I will never work at this organization, because this is not a place that was in line with my values, because I was clear on what my values are, where I'm moving forward. So just to wrap that up, so that's a good way of getting to a culture question, but there are lots and lots of different ways. But the main thing is, just for what I can say, and I know that Evie and Warren are going to go into some more details, is what is it that is really important to you, and to work that out for yourself instead of jumping into any process, whether it's looking for a new job or trying to find a job, with fear in yourself. You want to be a little bit more clear on you and what you need. So I could go on a lot, but we have a limited amount of time here. So thank you very much, and we'll be taking more questions that all three of us can answer later. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Ken. It's so important to look at the culture of an organization, and in terms of framing your search in general and for the long haul. So I'm going to turn it over to Evie Scoville, and Evie is going to talk to us about building your network.
Yes, thank you, Leslie. And thank you, Ken. By way of background, I'm a graduate of Hamilton College in 1985. And since then, I had a short stint in teaching high school English and coaching lacrosse. which was a lot of fun. But after that, I found the remaining years of my career since then in really what's now today called the talent management area. So I've been the chief talent management officer for professional services firms, really leading their recruiting, PD, training, evaluation, promotion, compensation, diversity and inclusion. And a handful of years ago now, 4 or 5 years ago, I decided to start my own business, which is both doing consulting to firms in exactly that area, in the talent management area, and then also supporting them in what has always been my passion, and that is the career development for their individuals. So I am very often hired by professional services firms to coach their people. And as Ken and I know, we live in a city that is wonderful in Boston, but it's also small enough that very quickly your network finds you when they've left a place. So I do now occasionally work with individuals, which is a lot of fun as well. Really the most significant mentor in my career taught me many years ago and has reinforced it for a whole generation of folks, that you have to leave everybody with 3 ideas. So today I'm going to leave you, my hope is, with 3 thoughts. The first thing I want to talk about is sort of try and ground us and understand where we are today, because that seems to be very helpful to my clients. It is a different time than it was 6 months ago. Then talk a little bit about what it looks like to invest in yourself, which Ken mentioned. And then really, I think the most significant piece of this is around networking and how that really, I believe, is a key to your job search going forward. So in terms of where we are today, there is a social psychologist at the Harvard Business School by the name of Amy Cuddy, that if you all have not seen her TED Talk or read her books, her TED Talk may still be the #1 TED Talk of all time. And it's about body language, but really at the end of the day, to me, and why I have my clients look at it, is it's really about resilience. And if you listen to her 20-minute speech, it is hard not to be incredibly motivated, because we may think we're facing hard times now. She faced extraordinary hard times and has achieved her dreams. And so it's a very inspirational piece. But what she's talking about right now is that every crisis, and I think many would conclude that a pandemic or challenging times, etc., is a crisis, has 3 components psychologically. And the first one is emergency. And I think some of you will relate to this. There's something happens and it's almost energizing. There are shared clear goals. There's an urgency. You may feel focused and actually even more productive. The second stage she talks about, which I think is really important, because what the psychologists are saying today is it is where many of us sit at this moment, interesting moment in time, is regression. And that is that what you're experiencing is that the future may be uncertain. You lose a sense of purpose. You can get tired, maybe even irritable or withdrawn. I can guarantee you my daughter would say that I am those things right now, and less productive. And what the social psychologists are doing is trying to help everyone that is in that phase right now move from the phase of regression, wherever you are in your life, into what's called recovery. And the goal of that is to begin to reorient yourself, to revise your goals and expectations, even revise your roles, and to begin to focus on moving ahead as opposed to just getting by. And I think that's a really important thing to think about in terms of a job search. That if any of you find yourselves in the regression phase, how do you invest in yourself to move from regression to recovery? And the 3 things that I would leave you to think about in there are to first, this may be a time, and I think Ken was getting there probably in a much more eloquent and softer way than I am, but to maybe adjust your expectations. Take the opportunity for a reset. You may think, oh, I've always done X, so I need to be continuing to do X. Maybe this isn't, a silver lining, an opportunity to think about what else is there out there besides X, if X doesn't look like a viable option. And I would say you want to, as you're thinking about adjusting perhaps expectations, taking the opportunity for a reset, I'm not a golfer, but I would say play the long game. And there's a lot of people talking about right now that these are unprecedented times. And what you want to think about is perhaps right now, be kind to yourself and do what you can in your profession or in your chosen area until you can do what you want. And so I think that's a really important thing for all of us to think about as the sea is changing underneath us. As you go through that, I'd say you always want to be prepared. So if you have to take twists and turns and turn left when you wanted to turn right, make sure you're always prepared for the long game and for the big picture. To me, that looks like some of the things that Ken mentioned. You want to always track the market. You want to understand right now, where are the jobs? People are getting jobs right now. I have clients getting jobs every day. Healthcare, technology, right? I mean, there's some clear areas to be thinking about. And are those areas that might be interesting to you? You might have a passion in, there may be an opportunity, but track the market. Also, always be poised to leap when the opportunity knocks. So again, what Ken said, have that resume ready, have the cover letter ready. In this day and age, make sure your LinkedIn profile is updated and looks like what you want to. So if all of a sudden out of nowhere, the right thing comes along, you can move quickly. And then I'd say do something that most humans don't always do, and that is seek support. And that is not a pitch to hire any one of us right now, because we all do very different things. But do you need somebody to help you with your resume? That is often a god-awful task. It is like the worst thing that a client ever wants to do. Do you need help with your LinkedIn profile? Do you need a new photo up there? Family, friends? Do you need to hire a coach? People get coached for lots of things in their career. Very often as they're developing businesses or practices, think about investing in yourself. And I'm going to apologize because of course you get the tickle in your throat when you're speaking. And then the last thing is, under investing in yourself, adjust your expectations, be prepared. And then for me, really the most important piece of a job search is about networking. And that is often by my clients, who again are in professional services firms and have spent a lot of time very often focusing on a billable hour and not on developing relationships and connections. To talk about investing in your network is met with an extraordinary groan, right? Oh, it feels uncomfortable. It feels like I don't know how to do that. I don't have a network, etc. You do. But the reason why this is important is twofold. The first is you need to expand possibilities. You need to expand the number of people you know. You need to expand the number of jobs that you may be a possibility for or that you may know about. At the end of the day, a job search is a numbers game. The more you know about, the more choices you have, and the more that you can do. What Ken advised is really think about what the right choice is for you. But the data tells us that only 15 to 20% of jobs come through things like recruiters, headhunters, Indeed, LinkedIn, etc. 15 to 20%. That's really low, folks. If you're counting on that for your job search, I think it's going to be a very, very long haul. What you want to think about and count on are all of those other people, whether they be Hamilton classmates or alums or colleagues from work or family friends, that can do very often two things for you. They can expand your network by giving you access to things, access to other people, making introductions, access to those, which is great. They can also often get you access to jobs that you don't know about. And what I tell my clients all the time is it's highly unlikely that you're going to get the job that's posted online or that a recruiter tells you about. You're going to get the job that was never advertised. And that happens, and many of you may have seen You see a wonderful posting on a Friday afternoon about some terrific job, and you say, that's for you, and you get your materials ready over the weekend, and on Monday morning, the posting's gone. Posting's gone because that job was already filled. Legally, it had to be posted, but that job was already filled by somebody who knew someone and had been recommended. So I want you to think about, how do you talk to friends, family, colleagues, classmates, etc., about what you want to do and where you want to go, and how you ask them the question, who could you introduce me to in that area? And a lot of people get very anxious about that, right? Because we're asking for a favor, and that doesn't feel so comfortable. But I challenge you to think about it in a different way, and to think about the fact that actually maybe you're doing someone else a favor. Maybe you'd be the perfect person for your next door neighbor's cousin's job that he needs to fill. And it happens all the time. The other thing you want to think about is not just expanding that pool of opportunities, but that at the end of the day, people are hired and promoted based on two things: likability, well, the perception of competence, and then likability, which is often talked about as trust. And again, a study out of the Harvard Business School will tell you that at the end of the day, those are the two factors. And actually, it's the likability trust trumps competence. And why is this important to you? It's important because if you apply to something online, if you apply through a recruiter, and you should do those things, you just shouldn't bank on them, there's nothing personal about it. But if you're the recruiter for XYZ company and you've advertised for, ABC position, 300 resumes come on your desk. How do you begin to sort through them? You can try and make some assessments, or maybe the computer these days will make some assessments for you about the competence. But what you really want to know at the end of the day is there someone in there that folks know about that has credibility? So if John Jones from down the hall walks down to the recruiting holding the 300 resumes and says, hey, do you have the resume of Sally Smith? I want to tell you about her. Oh my gosh, I can tell you right now, those recruiters' shoulders just absolutely have this huge sigh of relief. They relax because now there's credibility. Now there's the idea of likability and trust. And that resume, I can tell you, it won't get you the job, but it will get you an interview. And so you really need to think about how that can help you and how you can get into a place where someone can hand deliver your resume. People can also not just hand deliver resumes. If you get an interview, they may be able to tell you about who you're interviewing with, which would give you a leg up. And you'll see that the more and more you work your connections and networks, the higher your possibility of landing the job that you want to. And I think the challenge that I see with my clients most of the time is where I started. I don't have a network. And I would really say to all of you, you do. You just need to rethink about it. And you need to be willing to tap into it. And then networking, in my mind, is a two-way street. It's, you're asking somebody for their advice, for their help, for their insight, for their wisdom. But you always want to be able to pay that back down the line as well, and take that with you. So those are the thoughts that I would share with you as we turn it over to Warren.
Great, thanks, Evie. I'd also mention that my Brady box was named Hamley before I changed it, and it was named Hamley for a reason. Think of us all as people to network as well. I'm from the class of '87, and my door is always open. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to a youngster, Warren White, who's going to talk about job search 2020 tips and suggestions.
Well, this has been the best thing that has happened to me today, because I just got called a youngster, which is fantastic. Thank you, Leslie. I appreciate that. And Ken and Evie have certainly set the bar very high. Thank you both. I'm going to try and keep things going. Hopefully we don't have a huge letdown here. But what I want to do is talk to you about a couple of things. I want to start off by just talking to you about some concrete tools, some things that you can use that are, sort of practical everyday things that you can use as you kind of go through those job search. If for those of you that are in transition or those of you that are maybe considering a transition, I think you'll find these sorts of tools useful for just sort of keeping you organized and all those kinds of things. Some of them have been things that, either Ken or Evie have spoken about earlier that I'll touch base on very briefly. Some of them will be some different things. And then I want to kind of leave you with a little story at the end that really is a story about resilience. And it's something that happened to me recently, and it was just a lesson that I learned. So I want to share that, and hopefully it'll tie together a lot of our thoughts. To give you a little bit more information about my background, for most of my professional career, the last 20 or 25 years, I've worked on one side of the table or the other as someone who has been focused on talent. Be that as an HR professional that's been responsible for recruiting or talent acquisition, talent management for an organization. I have worked as an outplacement consultant, which means that I have worked with those who have been sort of displaced and are in the job market. Many times it's sort of unexpectedly, and so I've been tasked with working with them, helping them to kind of retool, retrench, and develop a new strategy so that they can move forward. I have worked as a resume writer, career coach. So I've done, kind of all of those things. And obviously I've been in the job market myself. So I've sat, if you envision a table with 4 chairs at some point or another in the last 20 or 25 years, I've sat in all of those chairs. So I want to kind of share some of that perspective with you. Let me start by talking to you about some tools. Some of the things that I've really found helpful as I've gone through transitions, or things that I've advised clients, when I've spoken with them, that are just really practical tools that kind of help you move through your search. The first one is a book, and I'm going to hold this up for you. This book is called The 2-Hour Job Search. It's by a friend of mine, Steve Dalton. Steve is a great guy. I've sold a lot of Steve's books over the years. I think Steve owes me at least lunch or, something along those lines. But one of the things that Steve really addresses in this book, and the reason he wrote this book actually is he works in career services at Duke University, and he'd have a lot of students come into them, and the overriding feeling that they felt was just the sense of helplessness. Like they just didn't, the job search was just beyond them. It was out, there were so many factors that are beyond their control, and they just felt overwhelmed and they didn't know where to start and all those types of things. And what's great about this book is Steve gives you a bunch of really practical, tactical things that you can do so you don't feel like you're just sort of sitting there waiting for somebody to follow up with you. Just, kind of a step-by-step approach of how to, do research and how to conduct outreach. As Evie said, how do you reach out to your network? Reaching out to them very specifically, being willing to kind of follow up, all of those kinds of things. So he really gives you some tools that empower you. And a lot of times it's that sense of empowerment that helps you sort of build confidence as you sort of move through your search. It'll take away that feeling of powerlessness of, I'm just applying for jobs and they're just going up, my resume's in the black hole and I'm not hearing back from it on anything and all those kinds of things. He gives you really specific strategies on how you can approach that. It's a great read. It's well worth the price. It's probably in its 10th printing at this point. And there's a lot of great books out there. This is the one that I recommend most frequently. So in terms of tools, in terms of books, that's really, my favorite. One of the things that I really like in terms of just organizing and kind of keeping track of not only, where I might have applied, but, keeping track of networking contacts. Who have I spoken to? When did I speak with them? Keeping track of, creating a wish list of organizations that may not necessarily have a vacancy right now, but there'd be places that you would love to work. Those types of things. So keeping track of that, you can certainly use Excel. It works for that. You can use a lot of different things. You can use good old pen and paper. I really like Airtable. You can think of Airtable as it's Excel with a better graphical interface. It's better, just a better user interface. In my opinion, it's a lot easier to use. It's a lot more user friendly. It has a couple of pretty cool features that Excel doesn't have that I like. You can, it gives you the ability to kind of relate one field to the next. So you may, for instance, apply for a job, and you may find in going through your LinkedIn contacts that somebody that works for that organization. Maybe it's a Hamilton alum. Maybe it's not somebody that you know particularly well, but there's some degree of connection there. So you can reference those two things together, and maybe it's worth, once you've gone online, you've submitted your resume, maybe it's worth reaching out to that person to see if they'd be willing to kind of help you out with a referral. So I think it's a great tool. I found it really, really useful just for staying organized and kind of keeping track of things, and sort of making those connections that you might not necessarily otherwise immediately identify. We've talked a little bit about LinkedIn. I want to talk about kind of social media in general. LinkedIn, I think, is the most important tool. I can tell you, having been a recruiter, both a corporate recruiter and as a third-party recruiter, we use LinkedIn a lot. I'm on LinkedIn pretty much every day. That is one of the primary tools. Recruiters use it a lot to conduct research when they have opportunities that are posted that they might be working through, but also to sort of build their networks, build their own personal networks, and to build talent pools for future consideration, all of those types of things. So it's pretty critical to have a really strong LinkedIn profile. And there's lots of tools and resources out there that you can use to kind of help you develop that. Somebody mentioned Steve Dalton has a great LinkedIn profile. It's a great reference. That's one of his many skills. So that's a good reference point. Everybody can kind of go to LinkedIn and look at that and kind of use that as a guidepost. But it's important to have a strong LinkedIn profile. It's also important not to ignore some of the other social media outlets out there. Facebook is a great place, especially to do research, to conduct, if you are researching, it's a great place to build your network. So I know we think of it as, sort of the more relaxed social media outlet where we're networking with our friends and all of those types of things. But, your Facebook friends are part of your network, to Evie's point earlier. So you shouldn't overlook it. Their job search feature is really fairly fledgling, but I think it's important as not to overlook it as a potential tool in your arsenal. Definitely something you can take a look at. We could do a whole nother course on social media. That's probably a whole nother network, but certainly, there's some important tools out there to use. In terms of contacts, I would be remiss, obviously, if I didn't talk to you about our Career Center. That is a great resource for you all to use if you are, again, in search mode or considering it. Certainly, there are lots of resources that are available for at the Career Center that we as alums have access to. So don't overlook that as, again, not your entire search strategy, but a tool in your arsenal, certainly an important one. Your networking contacts really can consist of just about everybody. It can be former colleagues, people you worked with. If you had an internship, could be fellow interns. It could be your former bosses from your internship. Could be your classmates from high school or college. Could be your college roommates. Any individual from really any point of your life. I worked with a client once that identified her great next career opportunity at her dentist's office. She happened to be, in for a dentist appointment, chatting with her dentist kind of before the appointment started, and it turned out her dentist was friends with someone who worked at the organization that this person really wanted to work for. One thing led to another. A couple months down the road, that person was employed at that place, and it was all because she had the presence to kind of be talking about her transition and really considering everybody she interacted with, a part of her network. So that's really how you have to kind of think about it. I think it goes back to what both Ken and Evie have said about, making sure you're prepared for those opportunities. Think about anybody as that person who could potentially be the person to introduce you to your next great opportunity. So that's important, to kind of think about, your networking contacts in that way. And then in terms of technology, in terms of tech tools, I really don't think that video interviewing is going away anytime soon. There are a lot of practical reasons for that. The time it takes to schedule interviews and finding time to meet with people and all of those types of things, all of those scheduling challenges are greatly reduced using video interviews. I also think it's going to be a while in many offices before people are back face to face in locations and working full time. So it's really a great time if this is maybe the first time that you're using Zoom or you haven't used it very frequently. It's a great time to familiarize yourself with it. But I wouldn't ignore Zoom for the sake of other tools as well. Skype, Google Hangouts, Microsoft Teams, Join.me. These are all video conferencing platforms, and there are a bunch of other ones out there as well. It's a good idea to familiarize yourself with 4 or 5 of them. And the reason you want to do that is if a recruiter calls you up and says, hey, can we meet via Microsoft Teams? You want to be in a position where you can say, sure, yeah, I can do that. I've used it. I'm familiar with it. So it's a good time to take the time to look at some of those different resources and those different tools, really familiarize yourself with them. Because again, video interviewing in particular, I think this is going to continue for some time well into the future, regardless of whether we're back in our physical spaces or not. I think another thing, obviously, one of the tools that we've touched on a little bit earlier this evening, it's important to have a great resume. It's not necessarily at the top of the list, to Ken's point, but it is an important tool. It speaks of kind of where you've been in your career, and it's an important tool that you're going to need at some point. If writing is not a skill that you consider to be your strong suit, it is worth considering working with a professional resume writer. And again, disclaimer, this is not a pitch, but it's something for you to consider. It's not a pitch for any of us or myself or Ken or Evie, but certainly something to consider. Depending on how involved your resume is, there could be a range of prices, and also, the experience of your writer can impact cost as well. It can be one of those you get what you pay for kinds of things. So if you're online, you'll find a lot of $30 and $40 resume writers. You kind of get what you pay for with your resume. So think about it as an investment. Obviously, the document is what it is and the cost is what it is. Think about it as an investment and, consider that accordingly, okay? So I want to kind of close and tie things together just with a, kind of a story. And it's really kind of a funny story because it's a personal story and it's something that just happened this weekend, happened to me. So I want to share that with you and then hopefully open it up to any of your questions. So, we're at day, I don't know, 89 or something of the quarantine at this point. So digging through the old game catalog, and my wife and son and I are playing Risk, and we're a couple hours into the game, and my strategy is going really, really well. I'm just about to sort of, for those of you who are not familiar with the game, it's basically a game of global conquest. The idea is that you basically want to be able to place one of your armies on every territory on the board, and that's how you win. So I'm just about to, I've been working at this for a bit. I'm just about to, kind of take over Asia. Somebody asked me, Tom, are you playing it on the board? Yep, on the board, not on the computer. So just about to take over Asia and not quite paying attention, and I get attacked, and my wife of all people attacks me, and kind of takes over a bunch of my territories, and I'm kind of sitting there and I'm kind of stewing for a little bit, and I'm sort of upset that didn't really plan for that a little bit better and didn't quite see it coming and all of those kinds of things. But one of the things that I, sort of recognized after I kind of sat there for a minute is the game didn't stop. The game didn't wait for me. So while I was kind of sitting there stewing, the game was still going ahead and it was still moving. And I also recognized at that point that if I could kind of sit there and keep stewing, but if I didn't retrench and develop a new strategy, I was going to lose. Okay. So what I had to do was in that moment sort of be able to kind of put that behind me, and to be able to kind of form a new strategy, so that I'd be able to continue in the game. For those of you who are sports fans, you see this all the time. We are so, fan is short for fanatic. We are so passionate about our sports teams, and we get so angry when they lose, and particularly when it's a big game and you lose to our rivals, and we're really upset and throwing things at the TV. And the players really, after 15 or 20 minutes, they're pretty much over it. They pretty much put it behind them and they move past them, and and that almost makes it more frustrating. So that almost makes us more angry. But the thing that they realize, that I think all of us at times would do well to realize, is that they have to move on. They have another game in a week, or if it's a baseball game, they might have another. It could be a doubleheader. They might have another game in an hour. So the old adage is, don't let them beat you twice. So you don't want to lose the next game because you're still worried about the one you just lost. And so what that's all about is this developing resilience, right? So the coronavirus has really kind of thrown us all off course, whether it be personal job loss, or whether your family has been directly impacted in some way, whether your organization has been impacted. We're all thrown off course a little bit, okay? It's okay for us to take some time, to take care of our emotional and physical well-being. We can throw ourselves a little bit of a pity party, and do the things that we need to do, to make sure that we are mentally healthy, we're physically healthy, our family members and our friends are fine. All of those things are appropriate and important. But it's also important too that we recognize at some point we have to come out of that. We have to develop a strategy to move forward. So we have to be resilient, right? Because the game is going to keep moving. So we should take that time. It's appropriate to take that time, and it's important to take that time. But recognize too that the game is not going to stop. And so at some point, it is going to become important for you to develop your strategy, figure out how you're going to move forward, and to really, develop that strategy to get yourself back in the game. That's all for me, Leslie.
Thank you. That was fantastic. Ken, Evie, Warren, I really appreciated all of your presentations. And I know we have some questions that have come in, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Mary DiMaggio, that's going to go through the chat. We still probably have room for more questions if you want to send them in as we go through each one. Mary, will you come on, put your video on, and we can see you on camera? There you go, Mary. Thank you. And I'm going to unmute.
You're muted.
Hello.
Here we go.
Okay, great. So yes, we had a bunch of really good questions come in while you were speaking. So I'll just kick it off from the top. The first question was, what do the speakers think the job market might look like towards the end of the year Q4?
The $24,000 question.
A great question, right?
Yes, because I'm sure that Warren and Evie have their thoughts on this. Is one, given the fact that over the past few weeks, life has changed and projections have changed because things have changed, data has changed, situations have changed. Mm-hmm. I think that we don't know what's going to happen next week. Forget about Q4. But what I think some kind of overarching things are, obviously a large chunk of the economy is going to be in trouble. There's going to be a lot of things that are a problem. and just like anything else, there's going to be some parts that are going to do really well. Like I just saw something that said that Zoom now has a larger market share than the seven largest airlines. You know, and who could have thought of that happening 3 months ago? So I think that there will be opportunities, and this is going back to knowing what is it that is really important to you and what skill sets do you have, and then start searching for those places. You know, what are those areas that will have opportunities that fit your particular, you know, needs and opportunities and offerings. Evie and Warren.
So I think this market so far, to me, it's a little bit different than when we had, kind of the financial sector meltdown a few years back. Because I feel like really that sort of ground the entire economy to a halt. Okay. But I feel like right now, as much as, there's certainly a great deal of negative news. As Ken said, there are some sectors of the economy and some companies that are doing incredibly well. I spoke to an organization today who they're about 115 employees right now. They have plans to triple in the next 4 years. They are adding staff. They've added 10 people in the past 2 months. So there are certainly, plenty of sectors, and Abby, you ticked off a bunch of them earlier. Technology, healthcare. There are definitely sectors that are doing quite well, where you can, anticipate, business pretty close to as usual, if not growth, in some of those sectors. It's not, there's certainly a lot of bad news, but I don't think to me, it doesn't feel like it's as across the board as it was during the financial meltdown.
Yeah, my answer is I think I agree with what you guys have said. I think we don't know. Yeah. I truthfully think we don't know. It's changing every day. It's changing every week. And, there was a New York Times article that's probably six weeks old now, 6 Sundays ago, that sort of plotted out the worst case scenario and the best case scenario, both as it related to COVID, just literally what happens with the infectious disease and what's going to happen to the economy. I'm watching that best case scenario, which had a bunch of economists saying by year end, things are coming roaring back. But that was 6 weeks ago. And I think we really don't know. And I know that I'm not a person that's equipped to answer that question. I think if it's, you look at the two extremes, my gut is it's probably somewhere down the middle. And you have to plan for it and be very, I think, thoughtful. And I really think that Warren shared something very simple and extraordinarily important with us. And that is that you've got to be in the game. And if you take yourself out and sit on the sidelines because you're going to wait for it to come back, you will miss the opportunity. You need to be in the game.
Yeah, to Evie's point, I would say that there's so much that's out of our control. This is our opportunity to think of what is in our control and what can we do for ourselves and develop that.
Absolutely.
Thank you all. Next question. How do I know if my LinkedIn profile is strong? Is the premium LinkedIn subscription worth it?
Who wants it? I can take that. One is in your LinkedIn profile. There are certain metrics that they use to say whether it's quote a strong LinkedIn profile. Mm-hmm. As far as with LinkedIn Premium, I have not had LinkedIn Premium for quite a while. I'm thinking about at least getting it for a bit. So there are some aspects to it that you can take their courses and get badges on it. It allows you to email just about anyone. So there are limited things. So I would say before you invest in it, think about, well, what do you want to use it for? Because there are ways around just about everything that they make you pay for.
So I'm sort of the opposite, and I've had LinkedIn Premium for so long, I can't remember what it was like to not have LinkedIn Premium. If I'm looking at it over the long lens of time, it's been worth it. But there have been situations where it's been more worth it than others. So really, it depends on how you want to use it and what you want to use it for. As an individual job seeker, I wouldn't say it's a must have, but there are some nice to have features that come with premium that I couldn't imagine not having. And the biggest one is being able to kind of access beyond, your third degree connections. At this point, having used premium for so long, it would be difficult for me to kind of use LinkedIn the way I like to use it without that. But it really just depends. If you're looking at it as a long-term investment, then I think it may be worth it. If you're thinking about doing it for something in the short term, there may be a way around that without you having there may be a way for you to get the result you're looking for without having to pay the cost of it, because it's not the most expensive thing, but it's not cheap either. So that would be my suggestion.
I think it's probably maybe dated, but I think that you can still join for a month without paying for it. And I think if you're seeking a job, it is worth doing that. I think that just that you're a premium member often sends to the community a message that you are looking for a job. I laugh because I'm not looking for a job. I have premium for other reasons, but I get people who reach out to me and no, I'm not looking. But it is often a signal that you are in job search mode, and you can try it for a month for free. Just calendar when it will charge you a month later, and you can disconnect it, but use that month to play around to see if you feel like it's useful to you.
That's great suggestion.
I would agree.
Great. Thank you all. Next question. As a job searcher, how can we approach and frame networking conversations where the goals are more ambiguous? For example, when we are not necessarily applying for an available position, but just generally trying to build relationships. Any specific tips for starting and navigating those conversations in a substantive way?
I think I can take this one. One of the concepts that I talk about a lot in my work is I like to say, if you're a professional in the field, it's like you belong to a secret club and you know who's in the club and who's not in the club. So what you can do is, and probably everyone's heard the term informational interview. One that I like better is informational conversation. So if you think about having your opportunity to talk with someone is, I am here to gather data, and I can get data from you verbally in a way I could not get in a Google search. And also, because you can also say, you're in this field, you have a perspective, what would you recommend? What do I need to know? Where can I learn things? Where am I showing up as not in the club? So I would say a lot of times when you have these networking conversations, you want to let them know, even if you want to let them know, I've done all the work up until this point and I'm talking with you because you're the only source of this data that I can get. But if you go to somebody and said, accounting, what's that? Where it's something that you could have Googled, that's not worth it. But if you can say, I need your perspective and I appreciate that. So a lot of times you can go in there to say, I'm interested in this field. I've done this amount of research. I know these things, but I need to get more data. What can you tell me? And a lot of times people who are in a field will really respect that, in that you don't know. So if you go into it from that and supposed to, hi, can you give me a job? Nobody is interested in helping you out then usually. They want to see you as a fellow professional, another member of the secret club.
I think there's a really simple piece of this that is not all, but the great majority of people love to talk about themselves. Love it. And so you may not know where you want to go or what you want to do, but asking them about what they do. And as Ken said, yes, you have to have some basic background, but what are they doing? How did they get there? And what recommendations might they have for you? I think if that's something you want to do. So I think people are either going to say no, they don't want to meet with you, or if they meet with you, you turn it on them and they're going to love to talk about themselves. And you will learn a lot from that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the questions that's out there, and one of the things we don't really know yet is, kind of what is networking going to look like now? Now that for the moment, you can't go to a networking event, those kinds of things. So what does it look like, and how is it going to be different? All those types of things. But, Evie, you make a great point. People love to talk about themselves. So if you can approach someone in a way that you want to get some information from them, but ask them an open-ended question and give them an opportunity to kind of talk about themselves, that is a great strategy. The other thing that I think is really critical is when you approach a networking opportunity, you think about it as being a two-way street. Ultimately, you're trying to gather information, but sometimes the way to be able to do that is to make it clear that you are willing to give information and you're willing to help in some way. And so open that conversation up so that it's a two-way conversation. And, just make it clear to people, hey, if there's anything that I can help you with, I'm happy to do so. If you can make that, get someone kind of talking about themselves and then help them understand that you're available to help them if that opportunity presents itself. Those are, great approaches to, kind of really starting to get beyond kind of the superficial conversations and really start to hopefully forge a relationship.
I would also build upon what Warren just said. So if I were, say, trying to get into a new field and say I had a conversation with Warren and I learned something, and then I talked with Evie later and I said, oh, well, I learned this from Warren. So you're doing the research so you can help them transfer information that they might not have been privy to.
Absolutely.
And don't make this too hard, right? So start easy, and start with something, with somebody you know well, somebody your family knows well, and get comfortable with it, right? You take off the low-hanging fruit early. I have a client who last weekend, to Warren's point of how do you network, had a really good friend who happened to live somewhat physically close to him that he wasn't quite sure how to approach about the fact that he really wanted to look for a new opportunity. One's my client's a lawyer, the other person's in an accounting firm. They literally sat in their backyards with a fence in between them and just ended up having a conversation. And one thing led to the next, which led to a follow-up, which was, actually, I'm a little bit more serious about this, about this move. And you had mentioned maybe connecting me to someone. I'd really appreciate that. I mean, don't start with the biggest, scariest ask first. Start easy.
Yep.
Totally.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Sarah, for that question. The next question we have is from Elaine. How should I look for job openings that are different from what I do now, but involve key skills that are my top strengths?
So, I think one thing that is one resource that's out there, and I think we're particularly sensitive to it because I'm kind of in the DC area. Every profession has an association, and most of those associations have headquarters somewhere between DC and Baltimore, but somewhere around DC. But finding the professional association that, for whatever profession it is that you're trying to get into, and then being able to identify some members of that association, and then to take it a step further, once you know some of those members, go research them on LinkedIn. Find out what their career profiles look like. You can do a little bit of a skills gap analysis, which is where you sort of analyze what are the skills necessary for me to break into X profession? What are the skills that I possess? And where is the gap? And how am I going to close that gap? But I think a great place to start in doing that kind of that skills analysis is really starting with identifying the professional members who do whatever it is that you hope to do, and looking at those skill sets. And then you can really find out, what skills do I have that are directly transferable, and what skills, do I need to acquire that'll make me more competitive entering this new field. So that's usually, I think, in my opinion, a great place to start.
And I add to the what Warren talked about skills. If you think about that, and you think about what Ken talked earlier about, in my mind was about passion and preferences, etc. Especially if you're looking to make a change, you may want to consider doing, for example, like a Myers-Briggs assessment, which can be used very, very successfully for job searches to help you think about not necessarily where your skills are, but what your preferences are for how you work, what you do, environment, etc., and what types of professions does that lead to. So if you're really in this area where you're thinking more about the reset, something like that, someone could administer that for you at not terribly expensive. And you might get some really interesting insight that you hadn't thought about before.
Yeah, I kind of piggyback on what both of them are saying, in that one of the things I recommend to people is going back to my secret club analogy. People a lot of times look for the job and then try to figure out the rest. And I recommend narrow it down to the kind of area you want to be and then look for the jobs in that area. And also ask people who are in there, because one of the greatest things I've told people to do is if you can find someone who's a professional, might be a Hamilton alum, might be someplace else, but say it's like, oh, I'm looking to work in the financial services industry in the Boston area. That's kind of where I am. If you can find somebody who works in that field and say, hi, these are the things that I've been successful, I like to do. What does this look like in your industry? And then shut up and then let them talk. And because there are hundreds upon thousands of job titles, and I would say probably you only know 3% of them. So if you can talk with someone in that field to say, what does this look like? What do they call this in your area? And a lot of times I've had people say, they told me about this job I had no idea was a possibility. And then I started searching for that job because someone who knew what it was in that field could identify that for me.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for one more question. So the next question is, how can we get a job after having lots of gaps in jobs held for less than a year?
I've dealt with a lot of these type of things because a lot of people, depending on their family situation, they might have moved a lot. They might have had to take care of elderly parents or children or things like this. And a lot of it depends on the situation. And for the most part, it is, what is your story? How are you talking about this to someone else? And can you, instead of being scared of what it is, but can you say, oh, this is the theme that goes through it. This is the reason why these things have happened. And even if it's to the situation that it's like, oh, the company went under, I had a crazy boss who fired me, whatever it is, you need to know what is your story that you want to put forward that will state that, because it's your own personal brand and how you want to keep this, keep your reputation out there. So that would be very different depending on the situation. So that's where, going back to Evie's kind of comments, that's someone you probably want to talk with somebody else about that to really create the story that's going to be most effective for you.
And you want to be really comfortable with that story. It's got to be ring true, and it has to just roll off your lips. So it's really comfortable, and it has a positive spin on things that even may have been negative.
Yep.
Yeah, so the good news I would say is I don't think it's as critical as it has been, would have been 15 years ago or 10 years ago, where that was really, kind of a deal breaker in a lot of scenarios. I think the concept of loyalty and employment is a pretty interesting one, because I think a lot of times organizations demand loyalty from their employees that they do not necessarily reciprocate. Yep. So I think it's really kind of tricky. But I think the good news is, as Ken and Evie have both said, how you articulate that story, if you can articulate that story in a way that makes sense, it's not as much of a deal breaker as it used to be. I think companies are much more focused on capability and competence and results, and not as focused on, okay, so-and-so has been with, IBM for 10 years, and that's the kind of tenure that, we're really looking for. So that's the good news that I think is, the market's changed, in the last decade or so.
Thank you all for the questions and the wonderful answers. I want to give you a moment, each of you, to just, if one last thing you want to say to the group before we close out tonight. Start with Ken and then Warren and finish with Evie.
Well, one, thank you all for participating here. As you can probably tell, that we could go on for hours on this. We all have a lot more that we can say and a lot more we could talk about. I would say, one, I would just offer, I have an Ask the Career Advisor session every week on Facebook at 6:30 on Tuesday evenings. So, if you didn't get your question asked, come on to that. You can do that. I also have a virtual job search support group and other things, so I can put in my link for that for extra things. But I would say overall, for just this, we are in a time of great change. Things are going to be different now than they are in 6 months from now, as they were 3 months ago. So really, get back to Evie's point, what you need to do is be clear on your goals and invest in yourself, whether that's getting more training, knowing your stories, networking. It's what can you actually do for yourself. We all need to take care of ourselves at this time because it's too easy to get to spinning around in your head. So work on yourself, do what you can for yourself, and take care of yourself. Warren.
I think that's great. And I think, I'd probably circle back a little bit to, what I talked about earlier, the idea of just being resilient. The only thing we really have control over in our lives are how we react to the things that happen to us. So you can react with negativity, and that's not a bad thing. That's human nature, right? Or you can react with positivity. This is on a number of levels. It's been a very challenging time for all of us. But be encouraged too that as we have in the past, we're going to be able to work through these things. It may take time, and there's going to be some uncertainty. There's going to be some discomfort. It's not going to be a bright line solution. There are going to be fits and starts and all of those types of things. And I think that that's true of, the country as we recover for this. I think that's also true of us as individuals, as we kind of go through this kind of uncharted career transition that we're in. But be resilient, lean on your networks, have confidence in yourself, in your abilities, control the things that you can control, be good to yourselves, take care of your mental and your physical wellness, because none of those other things are important if that's not important. And you won't be able to take care of anyone else if you're not taking care of yourself.
I think I'm pretty much going to be summarizing Warren, but I would say stay in the game, build your network, help others as you do that. Helping others is profoundly helpful to you, and to your mental health, and to your future prospects. And absolutely practice resilience. That is an important thing in a job search. It's important in life. It's extraordinarily important in advancement in careers and setbacks in careers. So I think it's those things to really focus on, and keep the big picture in mind. This too shall pass, folks, and we're in it together. And I think one of the silver linings in all of this is, and I really actually hope and pray for it, that we are kinder to each other and more helpful to each other. And there's great opportunities for that. And so go forth. We will get there together.
Thank you. That's a great note to end on. If we didn't answer any of your questions, answer one of your questions, we'll get them to the panelists. And as Ken said, he's got a group and you can join. And I mentioned earlier, feel free to tap into class 87. I know we've got Heather from the Career Center on the line here. We've got a whole host of people to reach out to. So make sure you tap into that, take advantage of those opportunities. And again, nice to see you all tonight. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep in touch.